there's various reasons why I'd want to consider taking more risk in a job interview. And a couple of examples here for more senior roles. When they call you in last minute for a now virtual on-site interview, it's a well-known trick that employers use to confirm their preferred candidate for that given role. Or a more common scenario here would be when you are actually during an on-site interview and you feel like the conversation doesn't go your way. So what can you do to bring the conversation back on track? How can you take eventually a bit more risk here? And more interestingly, how can you prepare in advance to take a little bit more risk in this scenario? So in today's video, I'll talk about two strategies you'd want to consider employing here. The first one is substance, in other words, what you say. And the second one is presence, how you say it. So let's start with the substance first. What you say, it's of course extremely important in a job interview, but if you feel like you lost the other side, if you feel like you want to make an impression, a strategy you'd want to employ is to sound a little bit more melodramatic. Like, what do I mean by this? Well, for example, even if they ask you for what's your most successful project, you could start saying something like this. Well, I run a business which nearly went bankrupt after 1 year. It was really not turning into the right direction, but I eventually took feedback from friends. I also consulted with subject matter experts, and through hard work and various other strategies, I managed to bring it back on track and eventually turn it out into a multi-million-dollar business in just 3 years. Right, so notice here that in spite of the fact they asked me for my most successful project, I started with failure, right? Specifically to make it sound more melodramatic. However, I only spent maybe 1/3 or less of the time talking about the failure, and the rest was about the learnings, how I grew, and basically I advertise on my strengths here. So this would be something you would want to seriously consider, with of course, the note that you would want to practice this in advance, because talking about failure and talking about failure in an uncomfortable setup such as a job interview is not something very natural. So that's why you'd want to prepare these things in advance, and for more senior roles, prepare as many as 5 failure stories that you might want to use in an intense virtual on-site behavioral interview. So this was the substance, right? Now let's talk about the presence. By presence, I mean, how can you do to basically impress or to make that interviewer click in a way? And for this, my best example is a technique that I use here on YouTube, and which others as well use, to simply speak louder and more engaging during the conversation. And for example, I took some notes here. For example, you could look at Mr. Beast, you could look at Shelby Church, or there was another one, Graham Stephan on YouTube. You can look at their evolution through time and the volume of their voice and their engagement, their presence in the conversation. So by literally screaming in a YouTube video, you increase your potential to grab the other party's attention, and it works. Or here on YouTube, we're also having a little bit of advantage, because even if I record this video at a certain volume, I can always amplify it, and I almost always amplify it in post-production. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you to amplify your voice during a live conversation, simply because your voice will clip, unless you have really expensive hardware to use in that interview. But it's very efficient if you manage to be more engaging and to sound more engaging in a live conversation. It's true, it will take away a couple of brain cycles that you might otherwise use to use on the substance part if you want. But if you want to take more risk, and if you can, you could also practice this in advance. And I feel like this is a great way to take more risk, a more calculated risk on which you can prepare in advance in a job interview in order to bring chances your way. So these would be my 2 primary ways that you would want to consider taking hopefully more calculated risk in a job interview.